and welcome to the Pragmatic Product Chat series, where we tackle the biggest challenges facing today's product management, product marketing, and other market and data-driven professionals with some of the best minds in the industry. I'm Rebecca Calageris for Pragmatic Institute and your host for this episode. And today we have on one of my favorite guests. This is not the first time you have heard Dan on my show, but we've got Dan Corbin, who is one of our instructors at Pragmatic. He's got a ton of experience in product management. He's got background in software development. This is going to be really important when we talk about what we talk about today. And he's so passionate about what he does and helping others kind of in this field. And he's just a really fun guy to talk to. So welcome, Dan.
It's great to be here. Love coming on the podcast. Love being able to chat and just have these discussions.
Excellent. All right. So Dan, today we're going to talk about something that, the vast majority of our audience has definitely struggled with, has moments of, where they've really excelled. They've had moments when it's been really stressful, but it is at the crux really of what product management does. And that is how to work well with engineers. And again, we're going to go a little bit more in your background for those who've not had the pleasure of being in the classroom or who haven't gone back and listened to the other episodes with you yet, which they should. But I think you've got such a great perspective on this topic because you're really passionate about it and because you've been both sides of this equation. And even more so because you just didn't go, well, I needed this when I was an engineer. You did, as any good PM should, research on it, right? You went and talked to it so you could really establish a plan. So first, I've done a lot of talking already, Dan. Let everyone know a little bit about you. What's your origin story?
So I started my career on the technical side and I was a programmer. I built various apps. Literally the first language I learned was HTML. So we're talking early 90s. But then I was an engineer for a long time, did a lot of programming, built a lot of web-based apps. But there was frustrations I had because there was definitely moments in my career where I was building something where I knew no one was really going to use this. I spent
so frustrating
toiling away on stuff that I'm like, am I going to have any impact at all? And that's really what led me into product management. But when I made that shift, I really did have to completely change my perspective. I really had to shift the focus from, all right, how are we going to solve this problem? When can we deliver it to? What problems are we going to solve? And more importantly, why? So I've seen both sides and I've seen where the tension can be. There's actually, you want a little bit of healthy tension because both sides bring so much to the table and you want to kind of have that engagement. But there's certain things that product managers sometimes unintentionally do or things that they don't realize that they should be doing that really have negative cascading impacts for engineers. So this is an area I'm passionate about. I've actually done a lot of research. I did a lot of discovery, validation. I've presented this on at different conferences because if you can get that relationship between product and engineering really humming and really in sync, it can do amazing things for your product and your company.
So when you first made the switch to product management, were you a really good partner with engineers naturally? Did you did it go well for you?
I was really, they loved me from the get-go because I was like one of them. And I was a technical product manager. I was working on a platform where we were building products, API products for other developers. But, I wasn't a great PM at that time. They liked me because I was like, sure, that sounds good. But I wasn't, from a business perspective, I wasn't a great PM yet. I learned that over time. And part of the, some of the lessons I learned in that journey are some of the things that I'm sure we'll be talking about today and how important it is to really, you have to represent that product side. You have to be the voice of the customer. You have to make sure the business interests we're hitting those business outcomes. So, it was a good transition, but, I think there was points where I had to cut off my access to the code base because I would be like, oh, I'll just go in there. No, I'll fix that. And realize I was trying to wear multiple hats and that was dragging everyone down. So it can be a difficult transition, but so much of what Pragmatic teaches is that product mindset, working outside in, being market driven. When I really was able to make that switch mentally is when I was really able to succeed in products.
So that's interesting that you were embraced in the beginning, but probably because you weren't doing some of the role of product, playing some of those pieces. Then you've kind of found your balance and you start to succeed. And then you start managing teams, right?
Yes.
And, and then when you manage the teams, did you see how differently they were embraced by engineering groups?
Absolutely. Because so many people have different paths into product. And it really is, you have to have the right fit. And product can really be broken down into three main buckets. You have everything that's product related, understanding the competitive landscape, how the product works, what problems you need to solve next. You also have a process. How do we identify the problems, validate the problems, build and solve for the problems? But you also have a people bucket. How do you manage your teams? How do you manage your stakeholders? How do you manage up? And, finding that right fit is really important. But, specifically with engineers, sometimes you would see product people that had a great fit and they naturally worked well with engineers. Other times there was just a lot of conflict. And you have to learn to communicate with different audiences. If you try to speak and treat every audience the same, it's not going to work. Engineers, you have to understand their perspective. So it's really about listening, understanding their challenges so that then you can be a better, one of the things like I'm really passionate about is this idea of servant leadership. As a PM, you're not the engineer's boss. Your job there is to influence them, inspire them to build something great. You can't just dictate that. So how can you be a servant leader that makes people want to kind of get on board with these goals that you've set out?
So I think, okay, so let's go back to, so you're a leader, you have some people who are really nailing the partnership with engineering, some who aren't, you're hearing praise, you're hearing complaints, and you can, but I love this about the way your brain works too, Dan, is you were trying to figure it out, right? Not just go, okay, this one's good, this one's bad, but like what makes good and bad, right? So then what did you do? How did you go, like, I'm going to get to the core of this problem?
So what part of it is working with my engineering peers. So I've always really worked closely with CTOs, VPs of engineering, and we would set out certain expectations for the engineering side. Hey, we need to make sure, like, you have to get good at estimating. You have to make sure you're not gold plating, like we're building just enough, and like that we're able to kind of iterate and test and move fairly quickly. And then on the product side, we also need to make sure that we're doing proper validation and things like that. So when teams were struggling, we would first try to diagnose, all right, well, where's the issue? Where is the conflict? Sometimes it was just like the teams, they liked each other. They were both talented. They were just misaligned. They didn't both see the picture clearly. So sometimes that's what we needed to kind of help that product manager, coach them up. Sometimes there was just, the vibes on the team, as the kids say, Rebecca, the vibes were not good. So we had to go in and do some psychological safety assessments and, figure out like, all right, how can we get the productivity of this group up? How can we get them excited about working with each other? It was never one thing, but I think, over the years as a product leader, I would build up my own personal toolkit for how can I help this product person get better? How can I work with engineering so that they can also support the product manager? So a lot of it was, kind of diagnosing the specific issues, doing a lot of listening, and, also leveraging the leadership on the engineering side so that we can, in tandem, help that entire team level up.
That makes a ton of sense, right? Because there's going to be pieces on both sides. But I also know, because we've talked about this before, that there are some things, some unhelpful things that if people were to self-reflect, that listen to us, that maybe we do as PMs sometimes, right? That is not helping our cause in the way we want it to be. And you've like spent some time and done some research and some stuff like to figure out, okay, what are some of the things that we're doing? And I think if we told our audience, maybe these are all things that we could work on.
Yeah. If you're a product manager and you're listening and I'll list some of the things that are unhelpful that product people do. So, unintentionally, usually it's unintentionally, or excuse me, like it's not on purpose that they're doing this, but obviously you want to make sure you're covering the basics. You want to make sure that you're building things, you're asking the engineers to build things that have been validated. Make sure you have proper prioritization, that you're pushing back on scope creep. I also think it's important that you just show that you're organized and prepared. That when you come to meetings, you have an agenda, the meeting is run efficiently, and everyone knows what is the point, what is the outcome that we're trying to get from this meeting. some of the things that I see that happen unintentionally is sometimes product people will take credit because it's the team doing it, and they're often the evangelist or the spokesman for the team. You
Mhm.
really need to give that credit to the team for what they did. And you can't also just pin the blame on them if something doesn't go right. They product person, you're really the ultimate responsibility in whether a product is successful or not. Other things that really drive engineers nuts is when you're just purely in reactive mode instead of
Mhm.
reactive mode. Like instead of being proactive, not communicating why decisions are being made. All of those things really, really frustrate. It just kind of makes it feel chaotic for the engineers.
And I want to say on the communication one, I think the communication one is particularly key and it touches on some of the other ones. Like often we are pushing back on scope creep, right? We did do some validation, but are we making that clear to the engineering
Yes.
team, right?
Yes.
Have we
Exactly.
talked about what we've done? Like give them some
Yeah.
confidence in this, right?
Yeah.
How did we prioritize this? What is driving that? It's
Yep.
not they don't need like a dissertation on it, but like giving them some clarity into what we've done and why we've done it and
Mhm.
what the market's response has been just increases confidence incredibly and helps them
Absolutely.
back up what you've said, right? So if someone
Right.
else comes from the outside and says this, they can be like, "Oh, I know that this was kept out because of scope creep or whatever." Right?
Right.
It lets
Yes.
them be
Yeah.
your ally.
Exactly. And so it's not only communicating all of that work that you're doing, but it's also you have to repeat it. Just
Oh,
because
gotcha.
you're living it day to day, just be like, well, I mentioned that in that meeting 2 weeks ago. You might
Hmm.
want to like reinforce this. So it's like so gentle reminders of like, hey, this is what our goals are. Like for our, remember our OKRs for this year are this. This quarter, this is the main problem that we're trying to focus it so that we can drive these particular KPIs this iteration or like this sprint, remember our sprint goal is X, Y, and Z. So it's those reinforcing of just like, hey, this is why I'm asking you to do this is really important. So I completely agree. That communication piece is key because you might be doing the work, but if they
Right.
don't know it, it's still going to cause frustration.
And the repetition thing, like everybody just remember that in your career, no matter what position you're in. You live it every day. You just
Yep.
need to get that 30-second piece that you can stay at the start of a conversation that grounds everyone in what they're doing. And you're going to be tired of saying it and you're going to be like, oh my God, everybody knows. But they don't. They're running around doing everything else, whether
Yeah,
it's sales or finance or your boss. You need to have that like, okay, we are here because we're trying to accomplish this. Great. Now let's have the conversation.
exactly. So the one thing I'll also say, just to ramp that up, is that this is something with executives. It happens to executives in that product people were like, I mentioned that to the executives already. I'm like, okay, but you need to again reinforce it because since they talk to you, they probably talk to 20 other product managers. And then, as a leadership,
Yeah.
you also have to kind of consistently reinforce those themes as well, because that's how you can drive the alignment, which was one of the big takeaways when I was kind of doing research on this. If you don't have that alignment, it's really hard to be successful.
Yes. Okay. So you have all this research that tells us that all the things that we do, right? Scope creep, fairly price. And honestly, there are things that drive us nuts too, right? Meetings, I know, is also on your list of like, oh my gosh, so many meetings,
Yes.
so many meetings,
Yeah.
or ineffective meetings. Like some meetings are really important, right? They can be really good working sessions. But
Yeah.
so with all of these things that you uncovered,
Hmm.
what are the main things that you put in place to help your teams?
Yeah. So when I was kind of doing the affinity mapping and looking at all the insights, I really ended up with these 4 different buckets. One of them I mentioned already was servant leadership. So you're there, you're a leader, but you're really trying to serve the team so that they can do everything they can to be successful. And then showing gratitude for all of that work. Also, just the need to continually to level up
Hmm.
your ability as a product manager. You're never done learning. So I would always talk about mastering your craft. What tools are you adding to your tool belt? Alignment is another major piece for product and engineering. Having that clarity of what you're doing and why and what is coming up next. And then really the last one that was really important for engineers is staying out of the how. You're not the boss of the engineers. You're not telling them that here, you need to go build this. And really leveraging and respecting their expertise to solve the problems. Describe the outcome that you want, but don't tell the engineers and designers how to do it. That's their job. That's what the magic that they bring to these teams.
Right. You want to unleash their creativity, not stifle it. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Let's talk about each of these. And I want to start with servant leadership and gratitude. It's actually one of my favorite topics. It is something I am a big fan of. It does not mean I always execute it perfectly, of course, but I think it's so important and it's such a great mindset. And there's some great books out about it. But let's talk about like what it is, servant leadership, and why it matters so much in the product space.
It particularly aligns the product because of that idea that you're not the boss of anyone, and you really have to lead through influence and not authority. And I had product managers that like, oh, my engineers, they love me. I bring them, breakfast tacos, and I brought donuts. Like, there's so much more to that. Believe me, they will gladly pass up the breakfast tacos for you to protect the team in certain ways and to go out and represent them. And so there's lots of ways to do this. But first, obviously you need to just listen and hear what their problems are. What are their things that are challenging? You're asking them to do certain things, but obviously they're having to overcome hurdles. What are those hurdles? Make sure you feel that they feel heard on that. I think in a previous podcast, we may have talked about the happiness metric. That was just one specific tool I used to surface up challenges that engineers are facing that maybe you as a product person didn't necessarily see. But if you show you're interested in helping them succeed, that's going to build that trust and it's going to bond the team together. Plus, you're going to, be more effective in identifying like, oh, if I call it the happiness metrics, but it's really about like, what can I do to get my team more productive? But you need to listen to be able to do that. So we also kind of touched on some of the other things with product leadership or with the servant leadership and gratitude. Making sure that you're not taking credit. I like the idea of presenting side by side with engineering, showing that unified front. And, there's making sure that there's no space between you two and that you're always presenting together. As a product manager, you also have to follow through because you can often be a bottleneck for the team. So being a leader and really, being a servant leader means not being a bottleneck. So this also ties in with that being proactive instead of reactive.
Absolutely. I mean, servant leadership is something you can do at every level. You can actually have the title that forces people to do things theoretically, but that's still, and then really I think of it as my job is to help everybody else shine and do their job well. I have to get rid of the obstacles, right? Like what's in their way. That's my job to figure it out. And if the obstacle is like grunt work, then it's grunt work. It doesn't matter, right?
Yep. See, and it's that you just touched on that empathy that we want our engineers to have empathy for our customers, for the people that we're trying to solve problems for. Well, one good way to kind of demonstrate that and to help foster that is to do that for your engineers. Show empathy for the challenges that they have. They'll be able to better relate, and that'll mirror what you're hoping that they'll do with the external customers.
Yes, and when the teams that you're working with shine, like you shine as well. Like there's not, it's not like they're gonna be like, "Wow, the engineer team did that all by themselves." And I mean, it's not about that. Like the credit, for lack of a better word, always comes where it's meant to be.
Yeah, yeah. If you really think like, how can all of us succeed? You'll get plenty of recognition along the way.
And one of the other things I think you touch a lot about are OKRs and like setting successful outcomes and knowing what's going to be successful is a really, really important job of a servant leadership, right? Because again, this is really clear lines that the whole organization can go, yep, it's successful or not, include, the teams, members, but also the executives. And that's the way that you're just paving the path for them to succeed because you've set expectations correctly.
Yeah, if you could describe those outcomes that would qualify as success, that's great because the engineers are going to be able to build things. They're going to output things. They're going to create things. But are those outputs creating the outcomes you need? Maybe, maybe not. But they need you as a product manager to be clear, like, hey, in solving this problem, this is what success looks like. That's going to give them the framing and the context and the guidance that they need to do their job as well as possible. Because if they don't have that, they could go and solve the problem in a way that doesn't produce the outcomes that we need. So yeah, again, this is just one of those, another example of how, as a product person, you're key to the success of engineering. And you also have to, sympathize and empathize with engineers because they can't be successful unless you, put them in a
Mm-hmm.
position for success.
Yes.
So you have to have that awareness and understand why, if you're not doing all of these things, how frustrating it is for the people who are kind of on the receiving end of it.
When you touch about it's true. It's very true. I've done a bunch of native visits with developers. It is so frustrating to them when they build
Yeah.
something that no one uses. When they finish a product and it doesn't actually launch in the market, right? Like
Yeah.
that there's no fun, there's no joy in that. They want to build things that people love to use.
Yeah.
If they're not building them, then we're not doing something right.
100%. Yep.
Speaking of not doing things right, no, but we've both been in product for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And how I do product is not the same as I did in the beginning, right? There are certain fundamental truths, but we continue to evolve and improve and learn new skills. And I think that's one of the things, like you said,
Mhm.
it is, you always have to be learning. And it is the curiosity that makes a really good product person. So I love that
Yeah.
one of the next bucket of things that you really focus yourself and your teams on is continually mastering your craft.
Yeah. And one of the things that I would have my product managers do is take strength finder exams just to kind
Oh,
of
fun.
understand how they work. And one of mine was a learner. And I really, not that everyone has to be a learner but you do have to have that curiosity. And so the desire to continuate, like as I mentioned before, add new tools to your tool belt is really key. Now, there's certain fundamental things you have to do really well. You have to make sure you're doing proper discovery,
Mm-hmm.
validation, clarity on the strategy, running effective meetings, giving clarity on what is the problem backlog, what is the product backlog, I'm asking you to do in these various sprints, solving these larger problems. All of those things are kind of like the table stakes, and it takes time to get really good at those. But
Mm-hmm.
once you master those, doesn't mean you stop. You also need to learn some of the kind of team dynamics, some of those soft skills. How do you make sure that you say no and protect the team in a way that isn't frustrating stakeholders? How do you give clarity and transparency into how you're making decisions? How do you under promise but over deliver in a way that not only helps the stakeholders but also protects that team? Because when I say protect the team, I mean, so the team feels that they're at a sustainable pace. Like, great. Okay. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca needs us to do this. And then they can actually focus on knocking that work out. So all of those things kind of go into mastering your craft, but you still should be reading books. You still should be
Mm-hmm.
like listening to helpful podcasts like this, hopefully. I think AI is an obvious area where product people need to be ramping up to understand not only how might I leverage this new technology to improve my customer experience, but also how can it help me become a better product person. So the same way that you break down any sort of problem, it's the same approach. You do a self assessment, you gather feedback, you go out, you do discovery and validation, and say, all right, then you present to your leader and say, your manager, it's like, this is where I think I need to grow. What do you think?
Yeah.
And build out that plan and then execute it. And if you continue to do that training, you're just going to find like it's going to be more enjoyable because you're going to be able to, you're just going to be more empowered and you're going to have the tools needed to do your job.
Yeah. Yeah.
I probably left that. I should probably mention maybe take some pragmatic classes.
Ooh,
I'm just,
we'll
call
throw
me
that out
crazy.
there. Yeah.
Just, while we're here, let's throw that out there. There's a lot of great courses, a lot of great workshops. But I will also say being part of the community
Mm.
is a really, really helpful way. So check your local meetups. Make sure that you're an active member of the Pragmatic alumni community. You can learn so much from others. I mean, just that osmosis, like not osmosis. What I'm trying to think. I'm trying to go back to my biology terms and it's like, but just being around people who are having these discussions, sharing the challenges, sharing how they solved and resolved different issues. That's going to help you the next time you're in a situation that you haven't experienced. All right, how can I address this issue?
Every time I do a podcast, I listen to people and I talk and I make notes and you fold things in. You just, even if it's things to some level, right? It may not be an aha, but it's like, oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And a good reminder. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another way to show that you're mastering your craft is to share what you've learned. So
excellent.
Every time that you go and you do a presentation at a meetup to your other product managers at a conference, you're going to learn. You're not only going to learn as you're preparing to do that, but you're going to learn from what other people share. So going out and also sharing what you learned, I think is a big component of this. If you can go and teach and bring new concepts to other people, that's going to really benefit you as well as them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So we've talked about servant leadership and we've talked about mastering the craft. And the next one was alignment. It's a big one.
Yeah. And this is something that we touch a lot in our focus and build class
Mm-hmm.
is how do you make sure that engineers understand what is happening at every level of planning? So this is why it's important to make sure that engineering is represented at every stage of the product development process. So if you think of the pragmatic framework on the far left-hand side, understanding what are those market problems, you don't want to wait to start involving engineering and getting aligned with them just when you hit the middle of the framework and you're starting to kind of really execute and bring the product to life. So getting them represented there, having them part of the discovery validation, helping understand why decisions are being made in terms of how do we make product decisions that align with our strategy? You want engineering to be part of that discussion. There's also specific tools that Pragmatic offers that, again, helps with this alignment. Positioning is a great one. A positioning document is just such a succinct way of saying, this is someone who's having a problem in the market. This is how we can address it. And it's a one pager that just, quickly sums up, all right, this is where our focus needs to be. We also have personas, things like that. And then as you get further along into the process, helping the engineers, getting aligned with them by doing risk mitigation, doing proper capacity planning. So all right, what can we get done given that, this is the problems that we're trying to solve this quarter or this sprint or with this release. So it takes constant reminding and constant work it's almost like, you can't just, if you're going to sail from, Boston to London, which seems like a really scary proposition.
I was like, wow, that's a big trip we're taking.
But you wouldn't just they'd be like, all right, this is where we're going. And then, hands off the wheel or whatever like really off the rails. But you're constantly tacking back and forth, making sure you're aligned. And that's really what you're doing when you're leading your product teams.
You're sailing to London. Yes. But yes, you are setting the vision, the destination, and just helping make sure that everyone's continuing to see it, problem we're trying to solve, right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned some great tools of doing that, for sure. And the fourth one, I imagine, Dan, was particularly hard for someone who came from an engineering background. To stay out of the how, right?
Yep.
But even those of us who don't, we still have a problem sometimes getting into the how, and you think, this is not my expertise.
So this is one, and this kind of ties a little bit back to what we were just talking about, is getting that alignment. The same way you have to understand engineering, engineering needs to understand product. So when we're talking about getting aligned with engineering, bringing engineering into the loop earlier is going to help them understand the product side. But you also have to kind of understand things from the engineering side and trust them to decide how are they going to work best. It is not the job of the product manager to say, okay, we're going to run a Scrum team and do this, and then just lay out all of these edicts of this is how we run. They're building the product. They're being asked to commit to deliver on certain outcomes. So we need to let them decide. All right, I would never really care how my product managers, how their different teams run. I wanted to know, are they tracking their velocity? Are they improving? Are they getting better at being predictable? Are they able to hit their OKRs? So it's really focusing on the outcomes. How they do the work is really up to the engineers. And I can tell you, if you give them that autonomy in exchange for the accountability, that builds a lot of trust, and you're going to get better outcomes. So, the way we always talk about it, Pragmatic, is the PMs own the problems. The engineers really own the solutions. So we're going to focus on the what and the why, and then really make sure that they are focusing on the how and the when. And this goes back to a lot of things we've touched on already. If you want to set your team up for success, you need to take care of everything else so that they can focus on the how and when and do it in a way that, they're not blocked.
It makes a lot of sense. All right.
Yeah.
We talked about lots of different things, right? But when it comes down to it, and in your career on both sides of this problem, in all of the companies you work with here at Pragmatic, all the students you teach, what do you think is the key? Like if you were to this is it, Rebecca, it all boils down to what?
Well, it's elements of all four of those buckets.
Yeah.
Being an appreciative servant leader, being inclusive with decision making, and bringing everyone along and at every step of the development process. So that means in all different categories across the entire framework. And then just having that mutual respect and making a commitment, say, all right, together, this is what we can accomplish. So it's really that team aspect between product and engineering. When you see it work, and when you see that alignment, and when you see how great the team feels when they're, hitting those OKRs, when they're having an impact, when they're generating value, when they feel good because they've done a good job, it's like, it's kind of like just like a snowball going down a mountain. It really builds up momentum. And you want that where people are excited about going in. Yep. But in order to do that, you kind of have to take care of all these little things in order to get that big outcome.
Excellent. All right. Then my last question is going to be, so we know what the big things are, but if you were going to have people do tomorrow, feet on the street, 2 things differently tomorrow based on what we talked about today, what would you have them do?
I think first I would make sure you're trying to master your craft. If you're not regularly doing a self-assessment for the skills that you have and where you need maybe to develop more skills, that's probably a great place to start. Specifically with product and engineering, I would say make sure that you're listening to your engineers. Have them be part of that assessment. Ask them where you can get better. Ask them what do they love about the best PMs they've ever worked with. So listening to the engineers, understanding how you can help them, because it's going to change from different teams. Like this is a mistake that a lot of product managers make. Oh, I did this with this other team and it worked so well, thinking that it's cut and paste, and it's not. So that listening, and then also making sure all right, how can I be accountable? And I'm going to step up and level up my game in a way that can really make me a better servant leader.
Excellent. Dan, it is always so nice to have you on. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Rebecca. I love these chats.
All right. And you can find Dan. He's often in the Pragmatic alumni community, and he's always able to answer questions there. But he's also on LinkedIn, and you can find him there or in a classroom near you. All right. That does it for today's episode. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And don't forget to join us next week when we tackle another great topic designed to help you elevate your product, your company, and your career.